They try to cook it too fast, I'ma be eating some pink meat. That's a sentence that John McWhorter uses in his book, The Language Hoax, that he talks about quite a bit, in comparing that to the languages of various cultures all over the world. And he uses that because he's citing a black kid in Jersey City who he overheard while he's sitting on the train talking to another black kid. They try to cook it too fast, I'ma be eating some pink meat. Now, this is interesting because would that imply that the kid who said that is dumb? Well, it's interesting because John McWhorter talks about this. He says on the Language Hoax that we have all kinds of different techniques and ways to communicate, and for one to say that is dumb and the other is smart is inherently flawed. Because what John McWhorter says, if you're going to do that, because that black kid in Jersey City says they try, instead of if they try to cook it too fast, I will be eating some pink meat. He says they try, no if, to cook it too fast, I'ma be eating some pink meat. And what McWhorter says, well, in China, they don't even use the ifs, and they don't even use like various pronouns. And I don't know the whole, I mean, he gives example after example after example of this. They don't use a lot of the same stuff that we do in English. In fact, Chinese would say we waste a lot of time with our communicating by formal English. And then there's other tribes and languages all over the world that has more thrown in there than what we do. And so in English, we'd say they waste a lot of time and energy with their communicating. So now in Black English, for instance, and this is what where I want to talk about, is that I remember the first time I ever heard like the sociologist, and I think it was Los Angeles back probably 20 years ago, talking about we need to revisit the idea of Ebonics and not discounting grades because of the way these kids speak. And I said, it's crazy. You're trying to violate you're going to hurt the culture, and you're allowing for, I don't know, you're downgrading the speech and blah, blah, blah. And, this is going to make it easier for kids not to learn. I thought that is very reactionary. And the interesting thing is, when you think about it, like John McWhorter broke it out, he says, wait a second here. He didn't say this, I'm saying it for him. And but he's saying, the idea would be, so if we say the Black English, because they say they try without the if, and they say I'm instead of am going to, that makes them less intelligent than English speakers. But Chinese speakers will say even shorter. All right, so does that make the Chinese speakers less intelligent in the Chinese language? Or does it make English speakers as a whole less intelligent than other languages who even make more, throw more words in their ability to communicate? And it's very interesting. I'm incredibly a huge fan of the McWhorter book, The Language Hoax. It's just, you have to open your mind. You have to see other things. I'll never forget hearing the Ebonics stuff. I said, this is nuts, man. There's no way that we should allow this. And look, I'm not saying we should. I'm not saying that. I'm not here to pass judgment. I am here to say, sometimes you realize, you step back in time and say, maybe we should have thought that differently. Because a black kid saying they tried to cook it too fast, I'm gonna eat some pink meat. Is he communicating? Yeah, we know what he's talking about. He's saying if they cook it too quickly, the meat's gonna be pink, and that's not good. We know what he's saying. Will he know if Ted Kennedy from the Kennedy compound goes up and say, hey, if they try to cook it too quickly, I will be eating pink meat? I mean, they communicate just fine. And what's the point of language? It's to communicate. In fact, it's funny because McWhorter offers, and I'll tell you a little bit about John McWhorter here in just a second. He offers an example of this. Back in the Old English, the oldie English, they used to say for thou would be plural people. So that guy, so you, Joe and John, you are going to the baseball game. But they don't say you. They say thou are going to the baseball game. There's one example, and he didn't say this, but I'll extrapolate that. So For you, if you were thrown back in Old English and say, hey, John and John, you guys are going to the baseball game, people are like, man, what are you, stupid? We don't talk like that. That's pigeon talk or whatever. You can't talk like that. That obviously you're not educated. And yet you might have a PhD in freaking language or whatever, or anything, I don't care. And you say, I'm a hell of a lot more educated than you are. And they say, well, obviously you're not, because you say you or you guys or you all or you going to the game as opposed to thou art going to the game. You see what I'm saying? It's interesting, actually, when you think about it, because what's the point of language? Is to communicate a thought, to communicate ideas. So if one communicates ideas properly without all the clutter in there, does that make him stupider or more stupid, whatever that is? Or if one communicates ideas in a quicker way, I'm not going to the game, does that make one smarter? I don't know. I mean, the answer doesn't make anything. That's what I'm trying to say. And McWhorter, who's a black guy, he would probably fit into the Manhattan Institute. So the Manhattan Institute is more conservative-minded intellectuals. Heather McDonald, maybe Charles Murray would be thrown on there. Conservative-minded intellectuals in the think tank called the Manhattan Institute. Not necessarily Trumpsters, but just more intellectual. The mirror opposite would be, or mirror image would be, the Brookings Institute, which is more intellectual-minded, liberal thought leaders, if you will, and the Brookings Institute on the left, the Manhattan Institute on the right. A lot of good intellectual stimulated thoughts in there. McWhorter's our side. It's just a very well thought out, well spoken, like Biden said about Obama. Not like that. When I mean well spoken, I mean he's able to relate ideas to an average person, where a lot of these academics can't. You know, he's sitting there saying, oh, can you just talk to our level for once in your flipping life? Can you just bring it down to a level that we can all understand? Does that make that guy smarter, who talks way above? Like I gave an example a couple days ago about an estate planning attorney that me and this guy from who's a portfolio manager in Boston were talking to think about hiring out to do some estate planning. And this guy was so far up here, probably a smart guy, maybe a brilliant guy, but he could not convey his ideas. He could not communicate because he talked well above us. So who's smarter? The black kid who's saying, I'm going to pay some serious estate tax, or this guy saying, I am going to pay some serious estate tax because of my lack of estate planning. Who's actually smarter? Well, when you think about it, if the point of language is to communicate, the black kid is, because we can understand him better than we can understand the guy way up here. Now, I remember when I first moved to D.C. From Maine, they called it Shorty. I never forget this big, tall guy, a black guy. I remember playing PE with, or playing flag football, and I was always pretty good because I was fast, and I was a scrapper. But anyway, I'm never forget. He was saying, I had no clue what the guy was saying, none. He couldn't understand me. I was a white kid from Peaks Island, Maine. I could understand. He could understand me. I could understand him. And most of the kids I was playing with on the football field were black, and I couldn't understand what these guys were saying. But that was not because they weren't speaking English, because the way they spoke it, similar to where we could understand a guy was trying to sell my wife's mom a home in Virginia, and he was saying, yeah, we got oral down here. Like, what is oral? Like Oral Roberts? I don't understand. Oral? What is that? Earl is oil, and same kind of thing. It has nothing to do with your intellect. It just has to do with the way you speak. And the accent that you have, your dialect, literally nothing to do with your intellect. So if you were to sit there and say that kid in New Jersey is less intelligent than you because he doesn't speak what you think is proper English, well, you actually don't speak proper English either. So inherently, you have to say you're not as intelligent, and you can't. And then you'd have to say, well, he doesn't speak proper English because we clutter the language up with all these things that really don't need to be in there, and the Chinese don't do that, so the Chinese must be less intelligent. But then you have to go back to some tribes in Africa and some tribes in, I don't know, what McWhorter talks about, how they have all kinds of different words that clutter up. Are they more intelligent because they have all this clutter in their language? I mean, the whole thing is silly. And it's just interesting to me because, and then you think they take the same language and use Jesse Jackson on the left and let's say Rush Limbaugh on the right. They're all speaking the same language, communicating the same way. It is literally the same language. And they both learned English, right? But they both have different ideas of the way the world should be run. And the way they communicate it is via English. And what some of these academics would have you believe is that because of the way they were raised in the language, that leads them to believe what they think, and that's just it's nuts. And yet again, academia is full of these kind of concepts that make no sense. Because of the language you speak, you're going to think a certain way. Apparently, according to McWhorter, that's mainstream in the linguistics department. Because of the language you are raised, that will give you a gauge of how you see the world. And you're like, inherently that doesn't make sense. Well, because literally just say, well, here's Rush Limbaugh, here's Jesse Jackson. Speak the same language, they see the world in two completely different ways. I mean, inherently you got, was it Franco, right? And then you got Cuba, freaking, not Batista, what's it, freaking Castro. Franco and Castro, and they kind of did see it the same way, but still, one's on the right as a fascist, one's on the left as a commie. How does that, it doesn't make any sense. And yet, for you to challenge this without your PhD in linguistics or being a supportive Noam Chomsky or whatever it is, I literally don't care. They'd say, well, you don't have the credentials to challenge that. And I think, and that's silly. But then I think it's we got to be open-minded here, more so than just that kid talks like a thug. Or that kid, he's got dreads, he busts. We got to be more open-minded. And look, man, this is for everybody, not just whites, but for blacks too. Because we're all American. The guy was saying the other day that basically Trump or the Republican Party is in tune with the Klan. And I sit there and say, look, I make generalizations too all the time, but to say the Republican Party is like lined up with the Klan, it boggles my mind when the evidence of the Klan has nothing to do with the Republicans. The Klans were killing Republicans back in the day, and on top of that, the most recent Klans member was Robert Byrd, who was a head leader of the Democratic Party. In fact, they called him the conscience of the Senate. He was whatever the freaking top dog in the Klan was. The Republicans have never been part of the Klan. That's nuts. And I just think to throw people, and look, I've done it. I'm telling you right now, I've done it myself 1,000,000 times a Sunday. And I wish I wouldn't have. And I still do it all the time, and I try not to. But you got to be open-minded. Maybe there's a different viewpoint. Maybe just say to yourself, when a guy says a sociologist, when these are all big libs, but just because they're big libs doesn't mean they don't have a good point that you might want to hear. Now, if you hear it out and you can beat it down, that's one thing. But just not to at least entertain it. That's what the left does. Let's not do that on our side. Let's entertain it and have some dialogue about that and think about it. Now, and that way you can open up the communication. The language can communicate, saying, I don't know about that, about Ebonics, and I don't know. But, again, like Homer says, your ideas are intriguing. I'll like to subscribe to your newsletter. At least we can hear the other side out before just rashly saying, nah, that's crazy talk. Because that's what I did. I did that with gay marriage. I did that with the whole Ebonics thing. And now I'm just thinking, like my man John McWhorter says, I'm not sure that's the way he didn't say this, but he's thinking, who's communicating? Is one better than the other? No, not really. It's better than the other if traditional English is what you're shooting for, but then we've already violated it. And then why are you shooting for traditional English if the whole point is to communicate an idea? Something to think about. We'll see you.